Welcome to TDR. We're here with President and CEO of Revive Therapeutics, Michael Frank. Michael, thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into it. Last 8 weeks, you've been the darling of the stock market, so to speak. You've had overall 400% increase in share price. What's been the leading charge of what's kind of unfolded in the last 8 to 10 weeks for Revive?
Okay, going back and looking at, I guess, when I joined the company in December, took the company back to its roots, more focusing on pharma and the IP it had. Company actually came out of infectious diseases, worked in the earlier days a bit with depression, and we had a drug called Bucillamine, which we repurposed back in 2015. Bucillamine was used quite extensively in South Korea and Japan to treat rheumatoid arthritis. It's still in use. Revive repurposed it in 2015 for acute gout flares, to basically treat acute gout flares. And it took it to a phase 2 study. And we also had approval to do a phase 2 study with cystinuria, which was from kidney stones. It was before my time, but the company basically built up a pretty good IP war chest, had that IP. It also had a lot of IP around CBD to treat a number of orphan drug designation type disease like autoimmune hepatitis. And basically, that was sort of the core footing. When I came in, I looked at the IP pharma, saw that the roots were there. I believe the pharma sector was going to be more of a burgeoning marketplace. And then I made a move really into the psychedelic space by bringing that into the portfolio as well by acquiring Psilocin Pharma. Basically, Psilocin had some good formulations that were developed by a strong few group of guys and basically understood the space. So we acquired it, filed some provisional patents, and I was able to take that IP basically and then leverage from my relationship or Revive's relationship with University of Wisconsin, who've done a lot of work with delivery technology and CBD, and then basically extended to the psilocybin marketplace. So the company really, spent a lot of time on those 3 pillars. More prominently, I guess, the last sort of month or a couple months with psilocybin and infectious disease Bucillamine as our lead. But the roots go back to having strong IP and leveraging that in the marketplace.
So talk to me about this, psychedelic space that we're in now. It seems to be garnering a lot of attention. There's a few companies that a lot of people or investors are keeping an eye on. Revive is one of those. So maybe talk a little, elaborate a little bit more. Like, what are you, I guess, learning in this space that maybe the average investor needs to know? And if you're in front of a group of investors right now, why Revive? Why are you ahead of the competition, and what are you doing differently?
Right. I think the Revive from an investment perspective is a pharma IP platform. We're not specifically a one-trick pony focusing on psychedelics, but we've got a robust portfolio in infectious diseases. But as I mentioned, psychedelics is now another big area. Right now, we're very adamant. We believe strongly in the clinical side. That's why, we're glad we have the relationship with the University of Wisconsin. We're working closely with them, more so on the clinical side and trying to look at some of the delivery technology that they've developed that's been used to sort of enhance CBD. We're going to be doing the same thing with psilocybin to look at rapid onset, faster delivery, and a lot of different initiatives out of the lab there. We also have some initiatives going on with the School of Pharmacy, which will be announced shortly. Okay. But we're more focused right now on the clinical side, working with those partners, and that obviously believe gives Revive a lot of credibility in the marketplace. Some of the other companies are doing some exciting things as well. My Medicine is doing phase 2 study as well with LSD. So they're obviously someone we look at and respect, and we want to follow a lot more down the clinical path versus coming out with other types of things like products or infused drinks and things like that. But everybody has an opportunity to sort of leverage the marketplace, and I think that over the next year or so, there's obviously going to be a lot of different players. But we believe right now the clinical is the way to go, and working with partners like universities.
Timing's everything, and it appears obviously your timing's been good. Your 3 main pillars, as I said before, is like Bucillamine, which is for infectious disease, and currently right now you're in pending clinical trials for a phase 3 study. A medication that was originally for gout is now being focused on inflammation of the lungs, and it's a topic of interest for everybody globally. knowing we're in the middle of a pandemic with COVID. So again, going back to the investor model, how significant is this something pending phase 3 clinical trials that could be materializing over the next 60 to 90 days?
Right. Well, obviously, I think that it's definitely a game changer for Revive. I mean, Revive, as I mentioned, has a lot of strength and roots. Clinically, it's worked, the team has worked, down the clinical path, worked with the FDA. We, as I mentioned, had done a phase 2 study with Bucillamine for gout. So a lot of that data that we had came in and provided the foundation for us to go back to the FDA to do basically what's called another IND, investigational new drug, for a new indication, a new disease. In this case, it was corona. When you do these submissions to the FDA, you have to be very specific on the disease. Although we're very interested in infectious diseases and strains like influenza and the flu, which come out of infectious disease, our premise here is obviously that Bucillamine has been anti-inflammatory, anti-rheumatic. It has a strong track record of safety and efficacy. It's been around 30 years. We have indication from work that's done obviously with gout that it has strong anti-inflammatory properties, and we have data to support that it's 16 times more powerful than another antioxidant protein called NAC. So the data supports our hypothesis, and obviously when we presented a lot of that to the FDA, they suggested that because we have an IND with gout, that we can do a much bigger study and move towards a phase 3 clinical confirmatory trial. So we're submitting our final IND package with our CRO and our group, and therefore after that gets assessed, obviously we expect to move towards phase 3 study and moving up to much larger sample base of people.
So from a medical standpoint, is this a sign of things to come, where a drug is originally treated for one thing, now suddenly it's being used for another?
100%. I mean, I think there's a lot of interest in terms of a lot of programs coming down from the government, incentives right now, fast tracking breakthrough status, orphan drug designations. You see a number of different companies looking at repurposing drugs for different diseases, indications. We're not the only one doing that.
Right.
But from a Revive's perspective, I guess, as you sort of to get back to the question, we're focusing on our portfolio. We have a few verticals, namely infectious diseases and the psychedelics are the key right now. So, that gives us basically an opportunity to look into 2 markets. And, people are looking at repurposing drugs, I believe in a lot of different sectors. So I think you'll see more of that too, obviously from burgeoning pharmaceutical companies.
Makes sense. How does it all work then? If you get approval to conduct these clinical trials, once they do begin, what is normally like timeline wise for something like this to occur and take place and you finalize?
Right. If I go to the situation in the U.S. Right now, so we submitting our final IND package, we expect favorable feedback shortly thereafter. Then got to pull the study together, and you could look at moving into the fall timeframe in terms of starting to dose patients. So then you start getting indications of how the drug's doing. But our timeline is really to move down that path, and obviously we could look at beginning in terms of a dosing process, potentially somewhere into the fall if we get accepted for the final phase 3 rollout. So phase 3 is a pretty large milestone for a company, and even for a micro company in that fact. I mean, there's not many phase 3 companies that are trading for less than $300 million. Some of them range for $300 million to $1 billion. So it is a significant milestone, and our focus is really just to get the process down clinically to the level that meets FDA, and that's what we're working towards right now to move that to the finish line. I do want to mention though, we're going to be doing a lot of clinical work as well in psilocybin with Wisconsin, so you'll hear more about that. But
what fascinates you the most about that industry?
Well, I mean, right now, I obviously see a lot of parallels with went on in cannabis. I mean, it's the early days. People are looking at different things like microdosing, and there's obviously legalization in some states right now that are being looked upon, Oregon, Colorado, areas like that. So, I think there will come a time when there's going to be, psychedelics that are obviously, or hallucinogenics that are going to be legalized. So the key obviously is, you got to have the clinical work to support it.
Right.
Some of the major companies like Cannabis, has breakthrough status, Asona, with what they're doing. I mean, some major institutes in the U.S. that are doing some, large scale studies, creating synthetic psilocybin. And, I think when you have a clinical university type of a partner, that opens up a lot of doors and gives the process more credibility.
Right.
So that's a path that that we're on,
It's exciting, right?
Yeah. So I mentioned, there's one other, another company in the space, which I mentioned before, which is obviously doing that for some other indications like, LSD and areas like that. So, I mean, psychedelics are not only, psilocybin, there's other areas that, that companies are touching upon.
These cannabis names, like Terry Booth is rumored to be getting in on the space. Obviously, Bruce last week, the announcement, he's been involved in MindMed. I think it's an important question to have, because I talk to a lot of investors here at the Dales Report and on social media forums. A lot of people are excited. However, at the same time, they're cautious right now because they feel like, is this another Cannabis 2.0? So if you're talking to people that are interested within your company, that may bring up that question where it's like, look, I invested a lot of this money into cannabis. A lot of them are almost like a pump and dump. How do you answer? How do you respond to something like that to differentiate the two industries? Why is this opportunity different than, say, what the cannabis opportunity presented from, back in 2017?
Right. I mean, from my perspective, obviously, I personally invested in, a lot of cannabis companies. Some did well, some didn't, some never went public. So obviously there's been a shakeout. However, I do feel that the pharma and the cannabis will still eventually, be prevalent and select names. So, I mean, Revive does have a strong IP around CBD. Getting back to psychedelics, I think, in terms of the organizations that are in the space, having credible team, having a credible bunch of partners to help validate your hypothesis is key. We're really right now in the early stages. So, companies that are working more, looking at, clinical results, clinical path, with different, physicians and doctors and labs and universities. I think those are the ones that are going to basically have the credibility and basically give more comfort to the investor than companies, that don't have that. So, Revive really, we've locked into Wisconsin and University of Wisconsin. We're doing a lot of work there. So, that's our thesis is really to work with that group. And one of the, the specific group we have there has a lot of expertise in plant formulations and working with different hybrids of that.
How was that partnership? How did that all come to fruition?
That came to fruition basically because Revive, when it during its days of the cannabis sector, it basically secured some strong IP patents out of the University of South Carolina.
Okay.
Basically, it was granted orphan drug designation for the use of CBD to treat hepatitis and ischemia. And basically, those were two patents and IP which the company procured. It also procured some very strong delivery technology from the University of Wisconsin around using in tannin and shittosin composites, which are basically plant and shrimp-based formulations. And when you mix it with CBD, it gave some unique wound dressing properties. So we looked at the delivery system, and we saw that it could be really, it could work effectively, actually, we believe, with psilocybin. And that's how it came.
Good for you. Exciting times, to say the least. So fingers crossed for the shareholders that everything gets processed and approved. The clinical trials, you get to go ahead in the next couple of months for phase 3, which is monumental. And I can see why, obviously, Revive Therapeutics is one to watch for right now. Michael, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us here today.
Thank you so much. And look forward to talking more in the future, coming back on with updates. But appreciate your interest and time.